Welcome back from spring break. To the first couple days, we're going to focus on a translated work called Death and the Maiden. It is a play written by Arieldorfman, who is a Chilean, Argentinian author who spent much of his lifetime in the US as well. So he originally wrote it in Spanish and then he translated it himself into English. And there are many versions of the play as far as performances are concerned, as well as some film examples as well. So a quick background to the play. So the play is set present day in a country like Chile. So he kind of, we'll get into it later, but he's really referencing the rise to power of Augusto Pinochet and the coup, and then the subsequent torture that took place after. So just a quick background. In 1970, Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile, and he was a socialist with some communist leanings. And I tell you that mostly because if you know anything about the US in the 1970s, we were not fans of communists and were quite afraid of communistic countries being over on our hemisphere, which is why we had, the Cuban Missile Crisis, as well as other issues that happened. I guess I would say we can go way back to our conversation about Afghanistan in the 1970s as well. So anyway, so he was elected president of Chile, and we had many efforts to the contrary to try to make sure he stayed out of that presidency. But his election is ratified, and then he enacts the economic policies that he was a fan of, the socialistic economic policies. And the US is not very happy with that. So they undermine the economy and pull out any sort of financial backing that we have. We boycotted basically Chile, and Chilean economy tanks. Flash forward 3 years later, and on September 11th, Chile is struggling economically still, and there is a coup d'etat, and Allende commits suicide, although some reports say that he was shot or sort of assassinated, forced to claim that he committed suicide on the radio. And at that moment, Augusto Pinochet takes over. The US is very happy about this because we just didn't want that communist in power, so we're okay with it, even though he takes over and runs it as a military dictatorship. And then over the course of the next 17 years-ish, Pinochet rounds up any opposition. He's known for allowing tortures, and they call them having people disappeared, where they're just taken in the middle of the night and nobody knows who's taken them, where they are, what's going on. And then you don't know, are they being tortured? Are they dead? They might be gone for years. They might be returned in the dead of night, etc. In the end, they found that he had probably killed about 40,000 people during his rule, and he rules roughly until 1990. There was a referendum in 1998, and then he sort of allows for the peaceful transfer of power. And in 1990, Patricio Aylwin is elected president. He then establishes the Truth Commission to look into those human rights violations that took place during Pinochet. And as a side note, in 2006, Chile did elect a female president. I just find that an important thing to note. And then there was this Truth Commission that looked into those human rights violations and prosecuted some of the violators. Some quick information about Arieldorfman. He is what is he? He's, like I said, he's an Argentinian. Trying to get the quartet ready for you. He was born in Argentina, and then he lived in the United States. And then the McCarthy era drove his family to Chile, and then they lived there until 1973 when Pinochet's coup took place, and he in particular fled and settled in the United States. He, I think, is currently still a professor at Duke University, although he's probably close to retirement. But he writes plays, essays, poetry, memoirs, opinion articles, journalism, screenplays, memoirs. I already said memoirs. On and on. And he's also active in the defense of human rights. So the play itself was published, and I think I come back to that, but around 1990 when it was safe to be published. So the play is straightforward in structure. It works mostly chronological, although you get this sort of backstory through the dialogue. It's 3 acts. It's considered a tragedy and realistic, although there's a little bit of an expressionistic device at the end, toward the end, where a mirror is used to kind of reflect on the audience, and we will talk about that later. And then he indicates the setting, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, as present, and the place a country that is probably Chile, but could be any country that has given itself a democratic government just after a long period of dictatorship. And so that's just sort of an important piece to consider. So some things to look for. We want to talk about our author as an author or a playwright. We will refer to the act and the scene when we're referencing the play. So the in-text citation will be author, space, act number, period, no space, scene number, period, no space, page number, because there are no line numbers in his play. And then some dramatic directions I want you to focus on would be stage directions, props, any movement, any lighting, any indication of setting. The dialogue and pace, there is quite a bit of interruptions, and then ellipses. There's sort of this breaking off of thought. So some things to think about there. Consider the subtext. So what is said versus what is implied or meant is really important in plays. And then also the audience's role and how the audience is perceiving the characters is important, and the action. And then always, of course, consider those elements of plot. The drama is tightly configured to that Freitag's model of exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, denouement, resolution. Okay. And then some other pertinent techniques include loads of dramatic irony, contrast, imagery, understatement, the allusions to Death and the Maiden, which is the which is this. So Death and the Maiden is composed by Schubert. It is part of his, I get to it later, the second movement of his string quartet in D minor. And so those allusions are important. And the music is sort of a motif that runs throughout the play. There's also a strong sense of darkness and with moonlight imagery, and then also sea imagery. Characterization is important, imagery and backstory. Some concepts that are broached that could tie into global issues include justice, documentation, interrogation, confession, forgiveness, atonement, power. Power with impunity, I think, is really an important aspect. Abuse, torture, just gender roles, responsibility of the individual, responsibility, sort of that collective responsibility, like as a citizen, what is your responsibility? What is the responsibility of a national entity? Personal identity, identity of a nation, suffering, recovery, victims, relationships, mental health, crime, impunity, again, that's sort of being able to commit a crime without any recourse, just government, morality, ethics, memory, evidence, guilt, ambiguity, truth, certainty, listening, trauma, truth, freedom. I think I have truth twice, eh? Rights and responsibilities of individuals, of a nation, of survivors, of bystanders, etc. So, like I said earlier, Schubert's string quartet in D minor is sort of the impetus for the title, or the allusion in the title. Death in the Maiden is the theme of the second movement. And something just to kind of consider that I found an interesting correlation with the play is that Schubert believed that it was impossible to return to, quote, life as before after trauma or destruction. It's just really something I think that gets posited in the play, and perhaps is part of, sort of what we're facing today. So that's all I have as a little background for you. Hopefully you'll enjoy this nice short play as we segue into these last few units before our I.O. Take care.